This week's episode of Taking Inventory is brought to you by one of our sponsors, Meet Market, your AI assistant for e-commerce marketing. Market isn't just another growth tool, it's a member of your team, helping you keep a pulse on your business and trained to save you time and make you money. It's also co-founded by James Barrow and myself. Visit us at withmarket.com. Now, let's get to the podcast. Ray Ghanbari is the CTO of Index Exchange, where he oversees the company's engineering, IT, and infrastructure teams. Ray has nearly 30 years of tech and leadership experience, both as an entrepreneur and as a thought leader, and has a deep understanding of analytics and data-driven value creation across a multitude of industries. His experience includes leadership roles at Solera Holdings, Omnitrax, FICO, Overture Yahoo, Vital Images, and a number of high-growth early and mid-stage companies. So we're very lucky and fortunate to have Ray join us today. Ray, welcome to the podcast.
Hey guys, thanks a lot. Thanks for asking me to join you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, you've had just a wide variety of experiences. You were at Overture and Yahoo. How did those experiences sort of shape your approach to AdTech today, just given kind of how much the industry has changed over the years?
Well, way back when modems were fast and dot-com bubbles were bursting and phones weren't smart, the web analytics company I was at got acquired by Overture, and I had the incredible opportunity to get thrown right into the middle of what was the fast exploding world of paid search. And so at the time, Bill Gross and team had this absolutely insane idea that you could run real-time auctions to inject ads into search results at internet scale. And the idea worked. And then the awesome engineers at GoTo and Overture figured out how to make that technology work at a global scale. And, we ended up being the revenue muscle behind most of the big internet companies at the time, or at least we were until Google actually figured out how to do it better. My focus there was on what we called performance marketing, which for us was all about wrapping closed loop, strategy-driven campaign and bid management around the core auction platform. The lessons I learned there about everything from real-time instrumentation and classification of behavior to mapping supply and demand together in real-time transaction exchange engines, to the criticality of data transparency, to adoption and building trust in new markets, to strategy-driven yield optimization. All of these patterns and lessons were like burned forever into my professional DNA. So after Yahoo, I was fortunate to apply them in all these patterns to healthcare, to fintech, to transportation and telematics. But I have to tell you, these last 2 years, it's been a real pleasure to be back in my original home of AdTech and have the opportunity to finally go back and go after some of the really big omni-channel ideas that we could only dream about back then. The industry's come such a long way, but it's just absolutely right to finish a lot of the stuff that we knew we'd get to someday back then.
It's funny because as people listening know, James, myself, and the rest of our team, we took a little detour as well from AdTech to FinTech and have now come full circle back to AdTech,
yeah.
just where we all feel home.
It's the same it's the same cycle, isn't it? It's amazing how the problems are the same even in radically different industries, and I think that's been a big fun part of the journey actually, about how you could sort of take a step back and build platforms that really solve sort of these fundamental industry problems that are there regardless of the industry that you operate in.
And Index Exchange is such a pioneer, right? It was founded in the early 2000s, very early days of AdTech. And so what brought you to Index Exchange kind of more recently? And then what are you focused on as CTO leading kind of this global company in the next decade of the company's history?
Well, Index really is a special place, and I immediately connected with the company's vision, the values, the people, which are really most important for me. But I'm a firm believer that ecosystems like AdTech will only survive and flourish in the long term if we're all deeply and truly committed to a win-win and fairness for all the participants in the ecosystem. And so as we've painfully learned from the collapse of dominant but maybe overly specialized companies, or more broadly, centrally controlled nation states, or poorly managed large-scale agriculture economies, large-scale monocultures are incredibly powerful for winning in the short term, but they're not ultimately sustainable. One missed innovation cycle or even a stretch of ill-considered over-exploitation, and the entire ecosystem can collapse. So over a 5-year horizon, the monocultures tend to win. Over a 15 or a 50-year horizon, you really need to have a healthy ecosystem that has the diversity, fair and fierce competition to ultimately flourish and grow. And so, the team here at Index believes the same things to our core. And, we've really had and held true to these values over decades of change and disruption and even temptation in the ad tech space. And so for builders like me that want to help make the world run better over a very, very long time horizon and make it easier for others to do the same, that was just irresistible. But as CTO, my role really is to build on the incredible scale and relationships that Index has built over decades, and then work hand in hand with our customers and partners to make our ad tech ecosystems as efficient and transparent and expansive as possible. So very, very proud to be here, and excited for the opportunities ahead of us.
Yeah, and a lot of our listeners, they tend to be like kind of, for better or worse, from the monocultures. So a lot of we have a lot of Meta and Snap, Reddit, Pinterest. I think for them, just given that at most of those platforms, they're both the DSP and the SSP, and they
Yeah.
are the ad network. Can you kind of just give kind of us like a step back of what is it that Index Exchange like does at its core, like, and how does it the evolution from like ad network to SSP, like how should people who have been sort of inside the wall gardens think about that, and like why is that so important?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to time horizons, right? And I think that Index is relatively unique for having been around for 20 plus years, really since the inception of ad tech. But really at its heart, it's almost like 5 different companies that have all sort of chained from one to the next. And it's really about not just helping ourselves, but helping the industry navigate through all of the disruptions and opportunities and complexities, and finding a way to just make the ecosystem grow as a whole. So me personally, coming from a professional background in public companies and private and venture-backed companies, I'm delighted to say that the ability to sustain a multi-decade strategic focus is a unique one and a very welcome one. We're an independent company. We don't have backing by traditional venture or private capital. This allows us to focus solely to deliver value to our customers and our partners, over a very, very, very long time horizon. We don't have those competing interests which are coming to bear. And so that allows us to have like this really deep DNA level commitment to what we call total market efficiency, which is delivering, for us, means delivering the most budget and working media possible to working media as possible, and then providing more value to our media partners, and then having the highest quality, transparency, and trust, and then driving the strongest performance for brands and agencies. We believe that if we do this and we're the most efficient and we're the best partner to be working with, that growing pie will just continue to get more than our fair share. But as sort of the footprint of programmatic expands and the internet consumes all, internet scale is awesome, but as you guys know, it's far, far from easy. And so today we're seeing now 350 billion plus real-time transactions come through our exchange daily. But we work very, very, very hard to make sure that our customers and partners can get the maximum benefit from that scale and reach without having to contend with the pain of that scale themselves. So by aggregating and curating both the supply side inventory and demand, we're able to bring the best of the internet to our partners, and the most valuable demand to our publication partners, and give them all the benefit of internet scale and reach without having to actually deal with the complexity and the pains that come with it. That for us is what it means to sort of enable a diverse and expanding and expansive ecosystem. And we can only really do that by investing in sort of the greater whole.
With that level of scale, I think a lot of talk goes to formats with ad platforms, that the creative formats and the ad formats on different publishers is such a big lever. But can you talk to us a little bit about maybe the inner workings, right? Like you said, you're trying to bring that scale together, but make it so it's not a burden for either the demand side or the supply side. Make sure you're transparent in it. And so can you get maybe a little deeper with us on like how does that actually work? Because that seems like a massive challenge, just
Yeah.
especially as the internet continues to scale and more partners are coming into the ecosystem. But you guys are doing such a good job of managing that. And so, what goes into that from your teams?
Well, you really have to build it incrementally. The first step is having the types of relationships and standards that allow you to create connectivity between all of the disparate actors. Without the standards and protocols in place, without the trusted venues for transactions to happen, where people can have confidence in what's happening and basically get the visibility and the results that they expect, things will fragment and balkanize, and you're back to sort of the complexity of having 50 different environments that you have to operate in versus participating in a larger connected ecosystem. And so, an example of this, for example, is the work that we did with header bidding, which really revolutionized the AdTech landscape. But it also shines, I think, a really bright light on what it means to be enabling and championing the AdTech ecosystem. And so for those who don't know, in a nutshell, header bidding allowed multiple demand source partners to bid in the same inventory simultaneously. So instead of having this sequence of folks to having that participation gated by an ad platform, the call went out, people could participate in the auction, and multiple parties can come in, increasing competition and yield for publishers, but also providing advertisers with fair access to the premium ad slots that they may have been blocked from before. So Index was one of the companies that helped pioneer header bidding and the standards and the protocols that were behind it. But more importantly, because of our position in the ecosystem and our neutrality, if you will, in mediating between the supply and the demand side, we played a really instrumental role in driving the large scale market adoption that has us all basically taken for granted today. And all of that ultimately led to a more transparent and efficient and accessible marketplace for everyone, without everyone having to put the initiative in to have all of the point-to-point integrations that they would need in order to get access to all of the supply or all of the demand that was potentially relevant for them. And so all of this is an opportunity to sort of bring the promise of internet scale to everyone, even if they're not ready or large enough to sort of either create it themselves or consume it themselves. But the old adage here holds true that be careful what you ask for. So for all of the folks who now have an opportunity to feast from the internet scale spring, all of this introduces a whole bunch of scale complexity, bloat complexity, variability complexity, and it really comes down to what you can do as sort of with the privileged position that we have, where we have to deal with all of this anyway. How can we sort of deal with the folks on both the demand and the supply side and really curate and filter and sort of manage the experience that they have in dealing with the internet scale opportunity that's available to them, to give them the benefit of that internet scale breadth and reach without having to deal with the complexity and the connectivity and pure infrastructure challenges that come along as soon as you get that kind of access and footprint. And so this is the challenge that we have. We always need to do better, and we're always looking to do better. But the way it all starts with connectivity, then it starts with intelligence, and now machine learning, and all of these things basically allow the difficult, hopefully, to become easier over time and more valuable over time.
A quick break from one of our sponsors. Meet Market, your AI assistant for e-commerce marketing. Market isn't just another growth tool, it's a member of your team, helping you keep a pulse on your business and trained to save you time and make you money. It's also co-founded by James Barrow and myself. Visit us at withmarket.com. Now back to the podcast.
And in a world where, at least from I think the outside perspective, the demand side does seem to be concentrating, right? Like you have the Googles and the Facebooks of the world, and then now it seems like the Trade Desk is sort of stepping in as like the open web sort of main demand partner. How does that sort of impact how you guys see the world? Like, is there is that, do you think, like a temporary phenomenon that, like, again, kind of over that 5-year horizon, demand may consolidate, but over time you will see demand kind of fragment again? Do you kind of have a point of view there?
Yeah, well, I think these pendulums go back and forth all the time, and it typically takes some disruptive change to sort of knock down the building, and then you start building up again. And so this comes back to sort of the durability and long-term viability of ecosystems. And whether large diverse groups can sort of drive that competitiveness and the evolution of an industry more, or sort of high levels of concentration are what you need in order to sort of drive the innovation and value add. We're a firm believer that we don't need to win every dollar. We don't have to service every ad request. If we're truly successful in delivering on our vision and our commitment to total market efficiency, our supply path is going to be differentiated. An environment where transparency and availability of data and people making rational decisions will always favor the most efficient and the frictionless paths, or the paths that actually bring the most value add that enable them to participate in the larger ecosystem. And so that's our focus, right? And to the extent that we do that, we actually help and enable and provide a benchmark for what a lot of these larger entities are actually doing. Competition isn't about winning every opportunity that's ahead of you. Competition actually creates the benchmarks that you need to keep everybody honest, and to keep everybody on their toes and everybody innovating, and everyone properly accountable to the endpoints in that value chain, on the publisher side and the demand side. That really should be our focus, rather than trying to overly control the core. We're very comfortable with that place, and we're really comfortable with that strategy, and we're continuing to push for it.
And is there a good sort of analogy, maybe outside of AdTech, about kind of like the role you guys place? Like to me, I'm always thinking about like financial markets and like ensuring that there's no, payment for order float or things like that. Like, is there kind of a good sort of non-ads analogy for listeners there to think about where you guys fit sort of in that process?
Well, with my background at FICO and fintech, I think one of the very interesting things that FICO has is a fairly big franchise around credit card and credit card fraud, and so I spent quite a bit of time looking at sort of the birth of the credit card and the credit card industry. And so there was a time where individual banks all had their own bank cards. And as a merchant, you basically had to decide which bank cards you wanted to support. And you had that laundry list of 15 bank cards that were pasted, in your window. And it was a big innovation by D Hawk and others at what eventually became Visa, to go out and actually build our modern notion of a credit card exchange, if you will, that would allow merchants to tie into it, that would then tie into different consumers, into different banks, and basically created the common standards for doing credit card transactions. And then that led to fraud problems, that led to the need for actually building up confidence in the transactions that were going through, led to accounting standards, that led to all of the things that you needed to do on the back plane to actually support these microtransactions over banking networks that were much more used to operating with larger, discrete, long time horizon type transactions with checks and bank transfers. And what we got is fundamentally a reinvention of what we understand as money. And so we all take that for granted today, but we take that for granted because the ecosystem of financial transactions was created 40 years ago. And we are all benefiting from sort of that many-to-many connectivity that we have, that the people very early on dealt with as they were trying to contend between a bigger bank was needed to a smaller bank, or which banks do I work with. I think what we're going through in AdTech is very, very similar. We're just lagging about 20 years behind where the banking transaction or microtransaction or credit card transactions were at the time. But the arc is very, very similar. The arc of history, I think, is pretty clear as we're going through here. At some point, things are big enough that no matter how big you are, you can't dominate it all. And inevitably, the success of becoming everywhere and everything inevitably creates the pressure where you need to be participating in something larger than yourself if you want to be successful. That's where the efficiency comes from, and that's what drives the adoption and sort of things becoming at the utility level.
Yeah, it's interesting because, when we were at Snapchat and even we have friends that are at other, social networks right now. One thing that we've been trying to articulate to internal teams is like, effectively as an ad platform, you are a lender, right? Often you're creating your own digital currency, you're getting paid in 30 days. It's a payments problem, right? And ideally, if you can look at it in that realm, you'd start to look at it in a different way, right? It's not necessarily, it's not. Sometimes I think people think it's a real estate business. To me, it really is more of a payments business.
Yes.
And I think you see parts of it now where they're starting to play nice. Like it's, you think about like Apple and how like with the Apple Card, to your point, they're part of the FICO system. They've joined the actual financial economy. But then if you look at like their ads business, for all, it appears as if they're going to stay out, right? They're like, they're not joining the rest of the world. And so, yeah, I mean, I think you kind of answered the question, but I think the way you articulate it, like eventually the market of ads is going to get so big as everything is an ad network that even if you're massive, too bad, you still need to be part of FICO. Like you still need
Yes.
to have. So I think I haven't thought of it that way, but I know I'm putting your words back in your mouth, but I agree basically. And I think that's a clever way to think about it as well.
Yep.
And as part of that, you talked a little bit about in the financial system, fraud has always been a big issue. And we've seen a ton of startups more recently, come out, raise a ton of money to combat fraud, whether, credit card fraud, insurance fraud, all kinds of things in the financial sector. That is something that, has always been a problem in the ad space. But now again, like you said, like we're maybe 20 years behind. There are now more startups coming out. There's more vocal proponents of there need to be solutions that combat fraud. And
Mm-hmm.
so, kind of what's your take on just the industry's response to ad fraud, how we're combating it today, and what you think we need to do to progress forward and actually make an impact on what's taking place?
Unfortunately, fraudsters often find fertile ground where diligence and quality waver, and in environments where it's difficult or impossible as a participant to really see what is happening and what is not happening. And so that opacity creates a window for people to do things they shouldn't be doing. So preventing ad fraud or any kind of fraud ultimately is a collective effort. But at Index specifically, we have a very, very rigorous exchange quality standards. Trust for participating in our exchange is front and center. Without that trust, you don't actually have the wherewithal to transact with freedom. It creates friction, it reduces efficiency. All the bad things happen as trust begins to erode. We belong to several working groups within IB Tech Labs, for example, which are helping develop common standards like app ads on text and give buyers confidence that what they think they're buying, they're actually getting. We're also fierce champions for transparency and traceability at the detail level, enabling our customers and partners to actually put their interests and align them with ours in driving the industry level vigilance and insights we need in order to keep our transactions safe and true. So fraud is another area as well that I think that the machine learning is going to really help us by putting us in a position to analyze the really large and complex transactional data sets that are going through our systems and identify patterns and trends that sort of indicate fraudulent activity. So, as you know, coming from the fintech world, modern finance would be impossible without sort of deep, fully integrated fraud tiers that are sitting on top of these transaction streams on both a real-time decisioning basis, but also from a retroactive investigation and intervention basis. I lived that world for many years. All of those same ML techniques, from outlier detection and profiling to mining to predictive modeling, all of these things are absolutely ripe for ad tech. And I think as the transaction volumes increase and the velocity of those transactions increase, we're going to have a really fertile ground to sort of learn from our brethren who've been walking this road maybe a couple decades before we have in ad tech, and really bring those best practices to bear, on top of the markets that we have. But I think this is another area that, the experience in fintech, where you have these enormously large banks that are doing the work that they do. I can tell you from firsthand experience, no matter how large a financial institution you are, you cannot do fraud yourself better than an entity which is actually sitting on top of multiple fraud or multiple financial institutions can help manage fraud. And so, even in this world where you have ultra large entities, fraud is a sufficiently large problem that an industry-wide view to the activity that's going on and how to intervene and manage it is going to be absolutely key to the long term, I think.
And is there an equivalent? It's funny. This is a problem we've talked about a lot at actually when we were at Snapchat. So a problem we would see is you would have an advertiser who was spending a lot of money on Instagram, for example, and want to advertise on Snapchat, and our finance team would actually reject them for trade credit. And it's because a lot of these small businesses don't exist in something like Dun and Bradstreet, right? They like kind of don't have a credit file because they're outside of sort of traditional business credit. In your guys' world, especially just given all the transactions you're seeing, and I guess the thesis being that there's just going to be so much more diversified demand over time, is there like a reporting agency? Is there a way right now that the industry could work together to basically, kind of to sort of cooperate on like sort of fraud and bad actors? Is there a mechanism for that quite yet?
Yeah, well, yeah, we have, we have fairly crude mechanisms today where we share lists, right? And we basically say, here are the people to not invite to the party, and here are the people to look out for. And even that by itself, is a huge, huge step forward from nothing. Never let the perfect be the enemy of the good. But I think a lot of this is going to come down to sort of what's the appropriate response to sort of the level and sophistication of fraud which is being perpetrated. And I think we're still in an environment where transactions are relatively modest and small scale. Things like protecting brand is and brand associations is almost more important than lost dollars in that microtransaction, which is happening. And so I think it remains to be seen. We're programmatic in particular is beginning to step out of sort of the periphery into sort of the core model for all sorts of marketing transactions that were traditionally quote unquote offline or broadcast. And I think inevitably that's going to bring with it the need for the kind of rigor and sophistication and call it selectivity that you're going to need to really be able to curate down all the opportunities to the ones that are actually safe and relevant and have the highest quality for what you're looking to achieve by participating in these broader marketplaces. It may be some third parties, it may be other entities that begin to emerge. We'll have to see where that evolution goes. But I think the folks who are looking to exploit the system are going to have as much a voice in where that evolves as those of us who are trying to be good stewards of the ecosystem.
Yeah, it's interesting, especially just given sort of some of the benefits of centralization. Is like you look at what Facebook's had to do with all the SMBs that they have, right? Like they have, they probably have better fraud detection than like any sort of B2B business out there, just given the scale of SMBs that they're dealing with and all the sort of bad actors to it. And as you're saying, as programmatic becomes more relevant to smaller businesses, which feels like this is almost like the first year that like our friends at DTC brands who have like a Shopify brands are like, yeah, like we actually are willing to try open web. Right before it was like, I don't even know what that is. And now they're like, let's actually look into this. It does feel like, to your point, it could be an interesting place where like there's a way for the walled gardens and open web to collaborate. And maybe that's like how you chip away at all this fragmentation. It's like find points of partnership, which feels like that kind of how it worked a little bit in fintech.
Yep.
But yeah, I was kind of curious, just like given that, like, are you guys seeing, a shift in sort of, starting to see more participants who are kind of that SMB level, or is it still kind of the, Fortune 1000 that, is participating kind of in the exchanges?
Yeah, well, our primary relationships are with publishers and with demand partners, and so obviously, as you begin to sort of proxy out from that endpoint, the fractal gets pretty complex and pretty deep fairly quickly. I think that ultimately, being able to manage the attack surface, if you will, or the exposure space. is a collective entity. All the publishers are doing their own work to protect what they do and to protect their interests. All the demand partners are doing it on behalf of their advertisers and their agencies. We're doing the same thing as sort of the proxy between them, so that we get some transitive benefit as we go through us as an exchange intermediary. Um, I'm not sure this is a one size fits all kind of problem that we solve. It's really about being careful about the company you keep, and having consistent and aligned values across it, and everybody recognizing that it doesn't take much to spoil the opportunity for everybody. We all have a diligence responsibility for the piece in the overall ecosystem that we manage. I don't have a crystal ball to say, whether we're going to end up following the same path as fintech or some other spaces that are obviously very heavily fraud impacted. But the pattern that I've seen consistently in operating across, doing fraud specifically across a lot of industries, is that the industries that respond best are industries who don't see boundaries to fraud as an industry level problem, that really commit to work together to address it to the benefit of all. The safer that a transaction space is, everyone benefits.
And this is a little bit of a tangent, but just given you had experience as well in healthcare, and just parts of, I guess, like EMR, there seems to be a common thread of like, how do we tie together disparate pieces and create more transparency and then ideally better outcomes. Are there learnings from like what the healthcare industry has done that you think kind of could also be relevant for AdTech?
Well, in a previous life, I had an opportunity to sort of work in the belly of the beast for transactions for healthcare with a large health insurance company, and it was a phenomenal opportunity to actually leverage healthcare transactions as a proxy for health and health behaviors. And out of that came, a whole suite of predictive models and scoring and segmentation, and all of the things that as a direct marketer, we were experiencing back in the Yahoo days. The opportunity was so incredibly rich to bring those same patterns into healthcare. And so I would put it the other way. A lot of sort of the marketing management systems and the types of things that you needed to do to create contact lists, we were implementing the same thing on the healthcare side, but instead of trying to sell televisions, we were trying to sell take care of yourself and take care of your diabetes, and so it was the kind of engagement models you need, the kind of what you need to actually see who's going to be responsive to a particular type of creative or particular type of message or particular type of engagement, but in this case, healthcare focus was very, very similar. I think the thing that was different, though, was sort of the sensitivity around the data that actually fed in to these types of analyses. People get pretty wigged out when you start messaging them, after they had that ache in their back, or the pain in their chest, and you start offering them to do a lot of things. We try to really leverage the trust relationships and operate through the trust channel that was available in order to sort of reach that endpoint consumer of the healthcare offer, if you will, and not try to do it directly from an insurance company. So how do we help a doctor be a better doctor? How do we help a nurse be a better nurse? And I think as we sort of translate back to, what's going to be happening as we do more and more with this type of potentially scary stuff that we're able to do with generative ML, or predictive ML, or segmentation ML, and stuff that just sort of starts to get weird. That the entity knows a lot more about you than you know about yourself. I think we're going to have to look for those same proxies in order to really have the relevant engagement and not chase people away with the weirdness of what they're experiencing.
I mean, that is really interesting that, you have to meet the consumer where they are today, and,
Sure.
and maybe you want to push them forward a little more and educate them. But, there's an expectation, certainly in healthcare, but even in ads, that, there's only a certain level of invasiveness that consumers will tolerate. There's only a certain amount of targeting that consumers will tolerate before it starts to creep them out a little bit. How do you think we move that industry forward, with, of course, the progress we've made in AI and how that's getting adopted into marketing, but then also just the new mediums that consumers are adopting, whether it be CTV streaming, whether it be audio, like this podcast, whether it be new mobile formats, metaverse, right? Meta's kind of new Oculus, and all these different new mediums. How do you think how do you think about comparing all this together to meet the consumer where they are today, but help the consumer evolve over time as well?
Well, I think there's two aspects to that. The first is how do you engage with a broader ecosystem that may not be terribly enthusiastic about their world expanding and being subsumed into something larger, and then how to players like us who are enablers and stewards of these types of things. How do we prepare ourselves to actually be relevant and lead and reduce the friction as the industry is evolving this way? We're experiencing this today, right? With all of the different formats that are either dipping a toe into programmatic pond, or jumping wholesale into it as sort of this massive industry shift to sort of the pure digital one-to-one models that we've all been refining over the last 10, 15 years or so. And so, transitioning to support these new formats, it's not just about technical integration. But it's also about sort of understanding the unique nuances that are needed to bring buyers and sellers, for example, together in these markets, right? You have to sort of meet an industry against the norms that they have today in order to help evolve those norms and have them actually take advantage of a lot of the new capabilities that hopefully you can bring to them as they go forward. We saw a lot of this in the early web days, right? Where we had to sort of have parallel print models and mailer models and door-to-door models with what was available through, and brick and mortar models with what was available through websites. We're going to go through that similar co-evolution with the market, I think, as we bring all these additional formats like CTV and mobile into the programmatic space. But I think the subtle thing is that it's important to have core platforms that all of this is operating through that are natively omni-channel, right? That really have at their day in their DNA the ability to sort of morph and subsume all these different transaction types. And the reason for this is that nobody wants to actually think about these things as sort of independent business lines that they have to manage, reconcile, bring together, balance as they're going out and trying to figure out how they're going to be modifying their strategies and their engagement with the market. And so having a platform which is sort of natively omni-channel, all of these can be sort of managed and optimized holistically without introducing that horizontal and sort of disconnected silo complexity, which is going to ultimately be a barrier to adoption. For entities that are highly specialized in one space, they could get traction, but eventually they're going to have to worry about it all. And they're going to have to worry about it all, even if it's not the core of their business. For exchanges like us, it's really about providing that substrate that can do it all, while really engaging with any individual customer or partner at the level that they are today, and doing the best we can to sort of reduce the complexity and give them a glide path to engage with this broader market, learn what works, learn what doesn't work, get the data visibility and transparency they need to do that assessment, and then gradually adopt and rise the curve as the performance of the market actually warrants.
Yeah. And before we kind of close out and let you go, we have a few questions that we want to just kind of fire off to you, get your take, and maybe more of a macro view on the industry. But as you think about AdTech, do you have any predictions of what this looks like in the next 5, 10 years?
Well, I think one really interesting part about being there at the birth of it and being at where we are today is realizing it's still the same at its core, right? It's all about industry collaboration. It's all about scale. It's all about managing the complexity so that the scale doesn't overwhelm you. It's all about standardization and protocols so that you can have trust and transparency. And it all gets sort of bubbled up into this whole notion of efficiency. Being AdTech is really about doing what we've always done, just doing it 10 or 100 times better with 10 to 100 times less waste than we had before. We're not just sending flyers out anymore and hoping that people pull them out of their mailbox and something good happens, right? We have an opportunity for true relevant engagement and to actually assess it in real time and adapt in real time. And I think this was part of what brought me back to Index is that the industry is at a scale, the tech stacks are at a scale, the data volumes are at a scale, the recognition of the value of this one-to-one real-time engagement is now mainstream, where we've got an opportunity, I think, to go beyond just being this silo that is a part of a broader marketing landscape to it just being an assumed substrate that the entire marketing landscape is operating on top of. And it's really going to come down to collaboration, standardization, and efficiency. We've got to make that work.
And how does AI fit into this future more broadly? You've talked a lot about it over the last half hour, but anything tangible, like how it fits in?
I can't tell you how excited I'm about this, particularly coming from the healthcare and fintech space, where we've seen the impact that it's had and the kind of changes that it can drive. But from I'm going to separate traditional yield optimization and predictive AI, which we've all experienced in the different worlds that we are in, whether we knew it or not, and sort of the brand new explosion in generative AI that we're seeing with ChatGPT and some of the other emergent large language models that we're seeing sweep across the landscape. From an optimization AI perspective, I think AI will be an instrumental in the evolution of AdTech. We're leaning hugely into it. 350 billion times a day, our customers actually tell them what's useful to them and what's not. We learn at the millisecond interval, and we adapt and morph and form and filter and package the exchange based exactly on what our customers and our partners are telling us. We're going to continue to lean into that, and our exchanges are going to get smarter and smarter, and it's going to be our customers and partners who are teaching us, leveraging sort of the underlying ML platforms that we've fully integrated into our exchange. From a generative AI perspective, this is truly a brave new world. I know this is going to change everything. It'll be very interesting to see how it changes everything. But I think for all things creative and relational and advertising, 5 years from now will be completely different than where we are now. As profound as the transition to one-on-one marketing was at the advent of the internet, I think generative AI will eclipse all of that over the next decade or so. So what we're doing today as an industry, I think, and we as Index, is really focused on transactional efficiency and bringing the benefits of global reach to people without them being overwhelmed and consumed by the burden of global reach. The next transformative wave for AI is really going to be about relationships and relevance. This is a future I honestly can't wait to see and be a part of building. But I think it's a little too early to see where this is going to end up, though.
Yeah, I mean, I think like you said, the industry hasn't changed all that much, but there are some super exciting things happening in the space, and so I think we share the same sentiment. I think listeners share the same sentiment of just excitement on what's to come. Lastly, where can listeners follow you or learn more about what you're working on at Index Exchange?
Well, you can find me at Ray Ghanbari on LinkedIn. Thankfully, there's a blessed few of us. So I'm easy to pick out. Or please visit us at indexexchange.com. You can even get the spelling of my last name there to make the LinkedIn search easier.
And we'll make sure to put that in the show notes. But Ray, this has been a true pleasure. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Guys, it's really been a delight. Really appreciated the conversation.
Thanks, Ray.
Yeah, we'll see you now.
Before you go, we need your help. If you enjoyed this week's episode of Taking Inventory, then subscribe or rate wherever you listen to the podcast. And while you're at it, please share this episode or your favorite episode with a friend. We'll be back next week with another episode of Taking Inventory. See you then.